Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm talking about what's shaking up in American cities and is stirring up major legal battles. Yes, President Trump just deployed the National Guard into Washington, D.C. Yes, he did. After already doing so in Los Angeles. Remember that? Now he says Chicago could be next, and even New York City is on the radar. Is this a necessary crime crackdown or a dangerous overreach of federal power? Let's break it down.
Details on the threat by President Donald Trump to deploy the National Guard to Chicago to fight crime. New reporting by the Washington Post says the Pentagon has actually been planning a deployment for weeks. Asal Rezai in the newsroom with more details from that report. Asal.
Yeah, Suzanne, we're getting a better idea of a timeline on when this could all play out. The Washington Post exclusively saying Chicago could be President Trump's next target as early as September. In his latest response to all of this, Governor J.B. Pritzker, who has authority over the Illinois National Guard, saying in part, the state of Illinois at this time has received no requests or outreach from the federal government asking if we need assistance, and we have made no requests for federal intervention. We talked to the leaders of the conservative group Chicago Flips Red. You see them right there on your screen. They say the National Guard's presence here will deter criminals. The ACLU of Illinois says that type of military policing is not the way to go.
It needs to happen. It's no law and order.
They're trained to do militaristic operations. And so the idea that that's the substitute is really a poor one.
The Washington Post reporting this so-called Chicago mission would be similar to what we saw in Los Angeles back in June when the administration deployed 4,000 members of the California National Guard and 700 active duty Marines.
You remember in August when Trump declared what he called a crime emergency in Washington, D.C.? That gave him the power to take control of the city's police department and deploy 2,000 National Guard troops across the capital. You see, these troops have been stationed in high traffic areas like the metro stations, the national monuments, and the busy downtown corridors. What's different this time is that these troops are authorized to carry weapons while on patrol. So supporters say DC had become unsafe and the strong action was well overdue. But you got the critics arguing crime in DC was already trending down and that this is less about safety and more about consolidating power.
Under Section 40 of the Home Rule Act to take federal control of the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. Along with that executive order, President Trump signed the statutorily required notification letters to Mayor Bowser and to the relevant House and Senate committee leaders. The second major executive action that President Trump signed was a presidential memorandum directing the Secretary of Defense to utilize the National Guard to address the conditions we see on our streets here in D.C. It also authorized the Secretary of Defense to work with state governors to utilize their National Guard units if necessary as well. These are bold, decisive steps intended to combat the out-of-control crime conditions we've seen on D.C.'s streets for far too long. And I, for one, am deeply proud to be part of an administration that's finally coming to terms with these issues, sir.
Thank you very much.
Sir.
Thank you. See, the Metropolitan Police Department and the federal authorities will be supported in the effort, a really big effort, the 800 D.C. National Guardsmen that we'll put on, and much more if necessary, much more. You remember I said, I offered 10,000 once. Remember I said to a certain person, a person who I thought always was highly overrated, not very competent. But I said, if you need them, we'll give you 10,000 of the military or the National Guard. They turned me down. But if necessary, we're going to move service members directly to joining the Guardsmen. And that'll take place very rapidly, and that'll be done in conjunction with Pam and with Pete and everybody else. Washington, D.C. should be one of the safest, cleanest, and most beautiful cities anywhere in the world. And we're going to make it that. We're going to make it safe. We're going to make it smart. We're going to make it beautiful. So beautiful.
But this isn't the first city where Trump has flexed his federal muscle. Remember earlier this year when he deployed the troops to Los Angeles? You see, that move, he bypassed California Governor Gavin Newsom, who did not consent to the deployment. Now we have this case with Newsom versus Trump. In that case, Newsom versus Trump is now headed to the courts. And the outcome will be critical because it could determine whether Trump has the legal authority to federalize the Guard without state approval. You see, in other words, Los Angeles was the test. DC is the model. And now Trump is signaling he's ready to expand this little strategy of his further. You see, Chicago appears to be Trump's next target. And in multiple public statements, he has called the city a freaking mess and promised that sending troops won't even be tough. But in Illinois, we got leaders like Governor J.B. Pritzker and Mayor Brandon Johnson. Yeah, they pushing back hard. They say crime in Chicago is actually declining thanks to the local reforms and community investments. And they argue that President Trump is just manufacturing a crisis to justify seizing control. So now, you got the legal experts pointing out that deploying troops without a state consent treads dangerously close to violating this thing called posse comitatus, which restricts military involvement in civilian law enforcement. So Trump, however, points to the Insurrection Act of 1807, which gives presidents sweeping power to use troops in domestic crisis. So you see this clash here isn't just about crime. It's about who controls America's cities, like local governments or the federal government. So you're saying it's the local government or the federal government who controls the cities. We'll see. You see, Trump also hinted that New York City could be next. He called out Manhattan specifically, suggesting that crime and disorder there justifies federal intervention. If that happens, the political showdown will be explosive. You'll have New York mayor and governors are almost certain to resist, and the legal challenges will escalate all the way to the Supreme Court. That's where Trump wants to take it, to the Supreme Court. Wow, this stuff is getting heated out here. So, what are the core legal issues here? We have number one, the Posse Comitatus Act, which generally bars the military from acting as police. Number two, we have the Insurrection Act, which is kind of broad enough to give a president sweeping authority if he argues local enforcement has failed. And you have number three, you got the states' rights versus the federal control. Governors are saying, we never asked for this. You can't just march troops into our cities. But Trump is saying, I can and I will. See, now the courts will now be forced to decide whether Trump's action represents bold leadership or an unconstitutional overreach. So here's the big question. Are we witnessing a turning point on how America handles urban crime? Or are we watching the federal government set a precedent that could erase local control? Washington, D.C. is already under military patrol. Los Angeles is in court. Chicago may be next, and New York could soon follow, and other cities also. I want to hear from you. Do you see Trump's move as necessary to restore order, or is it an abuse of power? Drop the thoughts in the comments. And if you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that button, that bell button, so you don't miss any of my future updates. This is Barb Reacts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.